Good afternoon from London. My name is Owen Jelf. I am the global head of the capital markets business for Capco. And it's my great pleasure actually to invite you and welcome you to this webinar where we'll be discussing post-trade intelligent automation for the next hour. Obviously, by your very attendance, I'm hopeful that we can deliver an interesting discussion on this critical industry topic. So we'll cover a number of things. We'll talk about how important the technology is for achieving goals such as cost reduction, efficiency, quality, and so on. The importance of picking the right technology partners to achieve those goals. The importance of or the impact to workforce and the options it can potentially give in terms of optimizing location strategies and so on, and how, frankly, it can offer opportunities to transform both organizational and process model to achieve better outcomes for customers, for internal stakeholders, shareholders, and so on. I'm delighted that we have a number of panelists joining us today from the industry. I guess in no particular order, Andrew Colombrides, who is the CEO of Accepta, one of the key solutions in the marketplace today. Phil Brown. Phil is the CEO of Clearstream Holding and a well-known industry participant on this particular topic, and Peter Kennedy from Capco, who heads up our technology practice in the UK, and is a deep capital markets industry practitioner. So it'd be interesting to hear what the panelists have to say. They'll be moderated by Gibran Ahmed, who is the Capco's Intelligent Automation Lead, also based in the UK. So without further ado from me, I'll hand over to Gibbs.
Thank you for that, Owen. And thank you in advance to our panelists for participating today. As you saw and heard there from Owen, we have quite a lot we'd like to discuss today. So we're going to dive into the discussion pretty quickly. The reason we're here and having this discussion, as I'm sure you're all aware, is that financial services firms are under a lot of pressure at the moment to reduce costs, enhance efficiency, deal with larger transaction volumes, coupled with all the regulatory requirements that are coming along. And the recent volatile markets have added to that pressure to be able to deliver better, deliver faster. And we're seeing a large number of technology vendors entering into this space now, both the more traditional vendors that we're familiar with, as well as a number of new up-and-coming fintechs that are challenging those traditional vendors, coming up with modern solutions, often using technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. And we've heard a lot about intelligent automation in the media surrounding our industry in recent times. And so what we'd like to discuss today is what actually is intelligent automation, what are some of the challenges, lessons learned, and what does the future look like? And so I'm delighted to be joined by the panelists, and I'll start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves and explain a little bit about their engagement or interaction with intelligent automation. So Phil, can we start with you with a quick intro, please?
Sure, yeah, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation to Capco. My name's Phil Brown. I'm at Clearstream, been with the company about 15 years. I'm the CEO of the holding company for Clearstream, which is my legal role, and then my kind of day job is I run all of the sales, client management, and customer-facing part of the organization. On top of that, I'm the chairman of a company called Registr, which is a trade repository for derivatives. So two slightly different businesses, both highly dependent upon technology. The area which I can talk a little bit about today, which is most closely related to intelligent automation, is what we've been doing around, firstly around CRM and how we're using some of the intelligent automation opportunities in CRM, and then also customer onboarding and maintenance and the KYC process. And then maybe if we get time, we'll talk a little bit about asset servicing, and that will feed into some stuff that Andrew's been working on.
Brilliant, thanks, Phil. And Andrew, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Columbridis. I'm the CEO of Acceptor, which is a leading no-code data automation platform. So it sits at the heart of digital transformation and automation. I've been the CEO for just over 4 years. I actually joined the business just over 5 years ago as the Chief Operating Officer. So I spent a lot of time in my early year in the business getting to understand not just around our product technology, but also spending a lot of time with our clients and looking at the problems they have and had and how we can actually help and engage with them to solve those problems. Probably a good majority of our revenue and our clients comes from the post-trade area. It was very, very strong in that arena. So we've got a lot of experience of how we deploy our platform and how it's used by our clients, and also how we create solutions to actually solve for those problems. So it'll be interesting to sort of understand, have a debate around how those problems have actually manifested themselves through the course of my time at Acceptor, and also how they changed shape in recent months with COVID, which has obviously had a big impact on the whole sort of resiliency of our clients' operations and the new set of challenges that they face.
Brilliant, thanks. We'll certainly be touching on some of those subjects a little later. And last but by no means least, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Jibs. So I'm Peter Kennedy. As Owen mentioned just now, I lead our technology work at Capco in the UK. I started life as a software developer in the early 90s. I worked in the capital markets industry and mainly in the post-trade area for pretty much all of that time. I worked with some of the quite early RPA type tools in the mid and late 90s when we were automating a lot of the test activity on the stock exchanges systems. I've subsequently worked in actually quite a lot of consulting related work in prime brokerage operations and in corporate actions in particular. And I suppose more recently, the focus of my career has been around the underlying automation in the technology area and DevOps and so on, which enables these changes to become real. So I'm very pleased to be here today and looking forward to a good discussion.
Brilliant, thanks, Peter. Let's get started by talking about challenges. Then we briefly touched on it. Phil, in your role, you must get introduced to a lot of vendors, big and small, offering a variety of technology solutions that can help you cut costs, improve efficiency, reduce headcount, etc. But before we even start talking about technology, can you give us a flavor of what the challenges are in your organization that make you even want to consider automation solutions? I'd like to give the audience a flavor of why it's even important and why we're having this conversation.
I don't think the question is specific to us. I think it's an industry question, actually. I'd say that the main challenges that we are facing is, firstly, on the revenue side, relatively low growth. The nice thing about this industry is it's a stable business in terms of revenue. It doesn't suffer from the volatility of some of the trading businesses, but then that gives you single-digit growth as a story. And if you look across the industry, we're looking at sub 3% growth. Is the norm. This year will be challenging or great, depending on which part of the industry you're in. At the same time, a lot of cost pressure at the core because of a variety of factors, but generally just doing what we do is costing more and more on a per unit basis. Largely, again, driven by legacy technology. We all in the post-trade industry run operations at scale, is what I would call it, and that means technology at scale. So a lot of that has been very dependent in the past upon mainframe type technology, big boxes that can do large scale processing, and that is old. And in fact, one of the challenges that we all face is that the developers that can continue developing that technology are retiring, and finding the people that can actually continue to support the platforms is difficult. I'd also say that the industry is extremely networked. So if you think about the global custody business, where you've got organizations with 100+ markets, many of them don't supply services themselves in any of those markets. They're reliant upon partners to do that. And then every input to the whole processing chain is part of a global ecosystem. So there's lots of interconnectivity that's required. But that's complicated, I think, by a lack of standards. So Swift has done some good work to try and drive standards, but we still see a lot of issues around standardization, especially in the areas of corporate actions and tax. And I'm sure that Andrew will talk about what they're trying to do in that space. And then overlaid on all of this, especially since 2008, well, even pre-2008, we had MiFID, then you had EMIR and all the changes that brought in the post-Lehman world. And then in the market infrastructure space with CSD regulation, which is also impacting the buy side and sell side, a lot of regulatory oversight and a lot of regulatory change, which is driving an enormous need either for reporting or to have a much more real-time view of the business that you're doing. And a lot of these problems have been identified. You know, I also, what I didn't say at the beginning was I chair an association called ISA, and which is the International Security Services Association. We've just completed a bit of research, which will be published this week, which looks at the future of financial services. And all of these trends come out very clearly in there. And you'll all get a chance to see it, but I think one of the interesting things is the way that when we're talking about tech, banks and CSDs view disruption from new tech in slightly different ways. So I think, you know, that the challenge is margin pressure is coupled with regulation is what I would say. And that's where we're all hoping that technology will be, you know, the silver bullet that helps us to solve this problem.
Hey, thanks, Phil. That's really insightful background. Talking of sort of legacy technology and trying to overcome some of the barriers that introduces, we heard a lot in the media and in our industry about RPA over the last few years. And the industry now seems to be switching from RPA to intelligent automation. And Peter, I wonder if you can tell us why we're seeing this shift from RPA to intelligent automation, and what do we actually mean when we say intelligent automation? Does it imply that RPA wasn't intelligent and wasn't the silver bullet solution to overcoming some of those legacy technology issues?
Yeah, sure. So RPA, so robotic process automation, you know, there are some very good examples, first of all, of successful RPA, you know, which led to some real cost savings and process improvements and control improvements and so on. And actually often by circumventing the constraints of the technology underneath them, which, you know, would often have lengthy change release cycles and so on. But, you know, as you suggest in your question, you know, as a techie, technical architects tend to frown on RPA. Really, I suppose, because effectively it adds an extra layer of spaghetti in the technology stack, which longer term then makes it even harder to maintain and change that stack. If I could use an analogy, we foster cats at home, and so we get a lot of scratches on our furniture. My wife has a habit of fixing those by colouring them in with a brown felt tip pen. You know, that's pretty effective as short-term solution, but you probably wouldn't, you know, if we had lots of nice antiques and fancy valuable furniture, it probably wouldn't be enough. And so I guess that's you know, that's the RPA world. It's effective. It has been very effective. You know, it's not the answer to everything. I mean, to your first question, you know, what do we mean by intelligent automation? I see that as two things, right? So it's, first of all, a combination of smart new technologies, which I'll come back to in a sec, but coupled with smarter ways of actually deploying them in a way that's maintainable longer term. Now, what I mean by the smart new technologies is really technologies like much smarter natural language processing for interpreting both spoken and written language. And coupled with really all sorts of different aspects of pattern recognition in all sorts of different forms. So, for example, you know, seeing the recurring patterns in errors and breaks and so on, and then the machine learning to keep getting better at to automatically keep getting better at those.
Yeah, thanks, Pete, and thanks for what is definitely the most obscure analogy for robotic process automation that I've ever come across, but definitely one I'll be using it again.
Excellent.
Andrew, you've explained a little bit about what Acceptor is in your intro. And you mentioned that you've done quite a lot in the post-trade space, and had a pretty good success rate actually with some of what you've done. Can you explain a little bit more about what Acceptor is, how it works, how does it fit into the intelligent automation space, and then how does it differ from the traditional RPA tools that some of the audience might be familiar with?
Yeah, sure. So look, I love Peter's analogy as well. I think I'll use that rather than the analogy I normally use. But perhaps it's worthwhile going back to what Phil talked about around some of the key issues around cost pressure. So how do you actually drive efficiency? How do you actually meet the needs of regulation? Which is predominantly a massive data issue, as we've seen with SFTR, and we've been heavily involved in that with DTCC. We power their SFTR reporting engine, but it's mostly around data challenges. But so when you're looking at those challenges, the way we look at those pain points is actually to make sure that you are addressing the process problems, operational problems, end to end. And in doing so, in actually transforming, digitizing the process, automating as much as possible, and having consistency in the kind of human in the loop activities that have to be retained. Our view is that's the real way that you drive the value and drive that transformation. And that's where we come from in terms of the how we look at the core Acceptor platform, is making sure that we have that breadth of capability that allows you to automate something that's very simple, such as taking in a trade file and understanding, validating it, and then processing it on into your order management system, to something very, very complex, which is dealing with all asset classes in terms of creating the OTC confirmation and taking through the matching and settlement process. And in doing that in a single platform, you're also mitigating the future issue of creating another set of legacy and technical debt, because the last thing you want is to go from a bunch of legacy infrastructure to a new set of legacy infrastructure. You've got to bring lots of AI and OCR and a bit of workflow and ETL and a reconciliation and plug it all together. So our approach is a single platform with a breadth of capability that allows you to automate and digitize basically any process. And that's how we apply that to the post-trade arena. And if you look at where, and I'm not an expert in RPA, but going to Peter's analogy of actually colouring in the scratches on the sofa, if you look at that, then actually that's analogous to where RPA has historically been used, which actually is, let's take a task in a process and look to effectively automate the manual activity that sits on top of that task, still retaining the legacy that's there or the spreadsheets that were there. So you're not actually making it more efficient, and you're only automating a task. You still have the part of the process that happens before you get to that task and the part of the process that happens after you get to that task. So you don't get that full transformation and the benefits that accrues.
Okay, thanks. And Andrew, can you give us a flavor of some of the more exciting types of work you're doing, or some of the more novel types of work you're doing, leveraging some of the technologies that Peter and yourself mentioned, like natural language processing or OCR? Can you maybe elaborate on one or two examples of how that's been applied?
Yeah, so I mean, we do a lot in the, where the strengths of Acceptor lie is where you've got processes that have lots of data flowing in, out, and within that particular process, which typically would come in different formats, would actually have different representations, so needs an element of transformation whilst you're actually processing that data through the actual operational activity. And that data will come in. So we do a lot of work in Asia, where the fax is still the book of record, and it's actually the legal book of record. So you cannot confirm a trade. You cannot confirm an activity unless it's actually been faxed to you. Even if someone's emailed it through or sent you the file on a spreadsheet or whatever, you still have to pick up the fax, and that's the only legal record that you can have. So we do a lot of taking, trade instructions in through fax that could come in different languages and actually extracting the relevant data that we need. So that's where OCR plays a very big part in that. The other activity probably relating to NLP, we do a lot in terms of contracts. So, so if you take current activity, a lot of activity around LIBOR at the moment. And we do a lot of we historically and still do a lot of repapering. So all the sort of repapering for Brexit, MiFID, margin rule repapering, etc. And in doing so, it's not a case of just creating the contracts. It's also then the subsequent, taking the contract back from the counterparty, being able to ingest that contract, perhaps taking someone else's paper, extracting meaning from the contractual clauses. So you do auto contract matching and comparisons. And that we extensively use natural language processing for that activity as well.
Okay, yeah, that is definitely an area we're seeing a lot of interest in the post-trade space, particularly with things like the LIBOR transition, actually trying to not just read the words that are written on a contract, but actually interpret them and apply context. And I think that's where intelligent automation really comes into its own and really adds value, is that sort of artificial intelligence, if you will, in being able to interpret things similar to the way a human would. And some good examples there from Andrew. Phil, if you had a magic wand and could apply intelligent automation to anything at Clearstream, what would be the top 3 activities you'd choose?
I think the first would be tax processing. Even in the and this is music to Andrew's ear, so I'll set it up and he can knock it out. And but I think the issue there is, even in the COVID situation where we've tried to move away from wet ink signatures to e-signatures, we've achieved that across lots of our business. In the tax area, it's not something the industry can solve, right? It needs authorities to agree. We need a lot more harmonization in the tax area. The second area would be in transfer agency, the transfer agency processing chain for funds. You're talking about millions of investors, all with KYC requirements, especially when we talk about hedge funds, which is more of an institutional product. There's a very high risk settlement and trading chain, and a lot of it's very manual, with 15-page subscription redemption documents, which have to be manually completed. There's a lot more that can be done there on automation. We're doing quite a lot of work there with our Vestima and Vestima Prime products, but again, it really requires an industry sea change, not just a single provider sea change. And the third area I would highlight, which is one that we're in the midst of dealing with right now, is KYC and client onboarding, where there's actually some good progress been made, and I think there's an awful amount of efficiency that can be driven through there if some of the claims are to be believed. The other thing I think is really important when we talk about what would our top 3 be is, when I first talked about the first 2, I wasn't talking about somebody solving the problem for everybody, right? I think what's much more important now is we've kind of evolved from a discussion around industry utilities to one that's about collaboration. And with more collaboration and shared interest, I think we can solve a lot of these issues with the technology. And that's where we see fintech and established players working together to drive some of these intelligent tech-driven solutions. And just to give some examples of things that we've been working on. So we invested in a company called Origin, which is to try and digitize some of the issuance process for fixed income. We've done that with others. Proximity, which is a business that came out of Citi, which is a proxy voting automation platform. Again, industry investors. It's not just a single player. It's a number of us come together. HQLAX, which is a tokenization platform for collateral. Again, a number of industry players investing in that. Funds DLT, which is a blockchain platform for for the funds industry between us and Luxembourg Stock Exchange. And even Registr, the business I talked about earlier, is a 50-50 joint venture between us and BME in Spain. So our history in the last few years has really been about partnerships and about co-ownership and co-development. And that helps you create enough momentum to then plug in the fintech capabilities on the side to turn what could be single organization solutions into industry solutions. And those two things together are really important, I think.
Okay, thanks. And Andrew, since Phil teed that up for you so nicely, it'd be a shame to waste the opportunity. Do you want to talk a little bit about the tax processing work you're doing?
Yeah, perhaps I can just pick up on the last point that Phil mentioned around turning solutions into industry utilities, because that's actually, if you look at our strategy for Accepta, we have a core platform, and that platform, as I've said before, has that breadth of capability that can effectively automate and digitize a process end to end, and from a very simple to very complex. And a number of our clients who have large scale digital transformation programs really value that breadth in capability and use it as an underlying strategic transformation platform. And just to give you a sense, one of our largest clients has 2,000 processes on Accepta. So they have created 2,000 solutions to digitize and automate across their whole enterprise. But to Phil's point, where we have worked with our clients to solve for the same problem a number of times, we've effectively pre-packaged and created our own solutions. So the tax solution that Phil mentioned, over many years we worked with all the sort of the large custodians to really understand the problem, and we have a team of operational tax experts that look at how operational tax departments work, and how we can continually refine and make that as efficient and effective as possible, to the point at which sort of probably 50% of the top 10 custodians use our tax platform, and it's evolving all of the time. And if you look at the complexities in tax around the plethora of data, all of the idiosyncrasies of global withholding tax treaties and holding rates, the fact that every single market will require a different submission of tax reclaim and follow through. It's a highly complex but largely data-driven and document-driven process, which plays to Accepta's strengths. We have the same in OTC confirmations, so it's very appropriate to post-trade, and many of the world's leading banks and energy companies, because we're asset class agnostic, will use our OTC confirmations solution to create the document of record, negotiate that with a counterparty and settle a trade. And we do it for the HSBCs of this world, Standard Bank, all the major banks across the globe. But interestingly, where we have solved for a problem multiple times but can see there's a consistent solution, and where we believe actually it sits at the heart of helping change the interaction and the industry ecosystem, we have underpinned utilities, and we typically co-create those with industry partners. So I think Phil mentioned regulation as one of the key issues. So all of DTCC's regulatory reporting is powered by Accepta. We've recently jointly launched SFTR, but that's the nucleus for all future regulatory reporting, because regulatory reporting is a massive data issue. So you're taking data from banks in a format and incomplete in terms of what needs to be actually reported. So there's a big data capture and transformation, enrichment and analytics exercise, which is one of the key strengths of Accepta before it's reported on. So we're powering that utility in Accepta. The other one, and again was mentioned before, is around margin, collateral margin calls. So AcadiaSoft is a sort of industry utility for trading margin calls. The issue around all of the industry participating in AcadiaSoft or margin sphere is the fact that you've got the long tail of organizations where it's uneconomic to actually invest in creating the electronic capability to interact with margin sphere. So they don't want to participate, and you can't blame them. Yet, if you're a JP Morgan or an HSBC, that means you have to retain an operational capability to deal with email margin calls. So what we've done is to aid participation. I think this is one of the challenges with utilities, is how do you get everyone to participate when not everyone wants to incur the cost of participating. So at KDSOF have a product called Relay, and Relay is actually allows, you know, email margin calls to flow into a KDSOF for them then to be captured, translated, converted into electronic messages, so the counterparty can receive it electronically and not have to retain an operational capability to process manual margin calls. And then when they automate the response, that then comes through into Relay, and Relay then converts it into an email and sends it out. And Relay's powered by Acceptor. That's Acceptor surrounding margin sphere is what we do. So there's a lot around that utilitization, which is really, really important. I think one of the, probably for a future session, is how do the utility model works, industry participation works when you get a critical mass, and how do you actually create that participation when organizations don't want the cost to participate? So how do you aid that?
Yeah.
That just gives you some examples of you know, relevant to what Philip mentioned.
Yeah, thanks for that, Andrew. They're actually really good examples. You mentioned the margin call emails, and I want to touch on the email subject a little bit deeper. Before I do, though, just very quickly to the participants, if you do wish to ask the panelists a question, do pop it in the Q&A box, and we'll try to pick it up towards the end. But yeah, coming back to email, you know, we spend an awful lot of time interacting with our inboxes and dealing with email, and in the post-trade operations world, that time is probably even larger. I've heard stats saying that up to 60% of a person's time is actually spent engaging or interacting with their email system. And in post-trade, that email is not just a mechanism for staff to communicate within their firm with counterparties, external agencies, etc. It also kind of forms part of the workflow. Like you said, a margin call email hits an inbox, a shared inbox, that effectively is part of the workflow. Someone needs to pick it up and do something with it. And my personal opinion is that email isn't really fit for purpose anymore. That's not what it was intended for. We've kind of retrofitted processes into it. And it seems natural to me that this is an area that is ripe for intelligent automation. And I think you touched on how you're integrating with email there, Andrew. But Peter, what have you seen out there that is addressing that sort of email workflow automation? Is there much happening in this space? And what are some of the challenges that need to be overcome if we want email automation to become more mainstream in post-trade?
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions there, isn't there? So I mean, first of all, as you suggest, you know, I guess email often effectively fills a gap, doesn't it, where a structured workflow has either failed or where, you know, the data in that process, you can't get it into a good enough structure to automate it. Now there are actually some growing capabilities that do allow you to, you know, structure and standardize and validate the information in email, and then automate some of the actions that are driven by that. You know, to be able to do that, you need to be able to provide some kind of structured template and ontology for that data in that mail. You know, you then need probably some, coming back to the language thing, some kind of natural language processing to infer that structure. Now, some industries, like the marketing industry in particular, use that kind of thing very heavily. And actually, the kind of mails and LinkedIn messages and so on that we all get in our inboxes are often automated ones. And actually, if you respond to them, those responses are also often automated too. So there's some quite clever stuff around that, and as I say, in particular in marketing. Now, the challenges, I think Andrew and Phil have alluded to some of the challenges very well already, right? The reality is that we operate in an industry with lots of different standards, and and faxes being a good example that we had earlier. And we are also dealing with things that we really can't afford to get wrong. Natural language processing doesn't always work, as you'll know if you own an Amazon Echo or if you use Siri, right? And with the economics of what we're dealing with, we do need to be crystal clear about the content. So in lots of industries, like I guess the marketing one, an accuracy rate of an when workflow of 90, 95, or even 99% is almost certainly enough. But when you're dealing with an elective corporate action on a big client position, it's just not, right? There's no getting around the fact that you have manual work to do there to make sure that the terms and timescales and decisions are completely unequivocally accurate. And I guess fundamentally that's the challenge that we have in post trade.
Yeah, and Phil, are you exploring projects around email automation at Clearstream, and have you hit that challenge around standardization? Is that a blocker for implementing this kind of solution?
Yeah, we are, and I think we're doing it as part in a number of different ways. Actually, I think what I would preface it all with saying is, we'd all love to have a fully automated end-to-end with our customers, but customers have their own ways of working, and some of them are large enough that they can dictate those ways of working. So you kind of need a multi-channel approach, with email being one of them. So, for certain clients, you can use a portal, which is self-service, and it forces them down a particular route. Other clients won't accept that. Other clients want to work in their own way. So I think we've deployed a number of things. One is something which we call Albert, and we gave it a name to make it feel like an employee, but it's a machine learning AI capability for receiving emails in our hedge fund area, which then categorizes them, sorts them, routes them, and gets them to the right place. And again, one of the things I would say is we have oversight. Back to what Peter said about making sure that you don't let something fall between the cracks. It's no different to the old story of a faxed order falling off the back of the machine and sitting behind the filing cabinet, right? So it's the same risk in a different format. But that's working really well, and it's driven a lot of efficiency for us, and the machine is learning all the time. So it's an improving loop. The other thing that we've done with our new CRM platform is we've created an email integration for client queries that come into our customer services area, which uses a certain amount of natural language processing and automatically creates query tickets, which then route those query tickets to wherever they need to be, and then timestamps everything in our workflow so we can see how quickly we're responding to customers and that kind of thing. We get hundreds of thousands of emails every year. And in fact, what we've noticed since 2008, with much more focus on risk and regulation, the proportion of emails relative to phone calls has dramatically increased. We get more emails requesting information from customers now than phone calls, which was not the case pre-2008. Each ticket takes us about 10 minutes to create, with a human being creating the ticket. And with the integration, we can create the ticket instantaneously. So if you're working in hundreds of thousands of emails and 10 minutes per ticket, you can drive a lot of efficiency through the process. And a lot of this really, the reason we're able to do this is because, and back to the discussion around underpinning technology, moving to cloud-based infrastructure means that we've got much more flexibility around some of this technology. So, and those that people think about the cloud as, my Google Cloud or iCloud storage, i.e. somewhere I just keep my data. In fact, in the institutional or enterprise world, it's not just that, right? It's much more about, if you think about the cloud being the platform and then creating connectivity standards and standard APIs, and then organizations like fintechs being app developers on the platform that you can then plug into in a seamless way. That's some of the stuff that we get by moving to native cloud application. And then we can get a lot more of this efficiency driven through on things like email integration and natural language processing. So that's where we've been doing our work.
So we've had an interesting question come in on the chat, actually, which is relevant to some of what you were saying around the volume of emails and the amount of natural language processing, etc., that you need to do. It says one of the key challenges of automation is data, because businesses are creating data at a very high rate today, and most of them remain in an unstructured or semi-structured format, such as emails, PDFs, scanned documents, etc., and we often call it dark data. This dark data in systems causes significant challenges to the automation process workflow. How do you see this being managed? Because these technologies help with structured data, but dark data makes it difficult to implement automation initiatives. Andrew, you must have come across similar challenges in some of the work you've done. How have you addressed the challenge of dark data?
Yeah, it's interesting. We call it the challenge of taking untrusted data to convert it to trusted data. So it's the same sort of concept. But I mean, for us, it's a common problem. I mean, we can deal with a process that has, a spreadsheet flowing into it from one party, an email from another party with unstructured data, a free form but sort of semi-structured document from another party, all containing the same or like data that has to be processed in the same way through the same underlying process. So that's where the capability of our platform is you use the relevant capability to effectively extract, enrich, transform the data, which is why we got the breadth of capability, which is why we have NLP inside. So that if it flows in an unstructured email, you can then flow it through the NLP engine to extract the meaning. If it's coming on a spreadsheet, then it goes through a rule set, but they both end up in the same process end to end. And it is really interesting, but back to a point that Phil made, which actually is, and Peter as well, that what we see is, AI, NLP, machine learning, whatever you want to use, is kind of like, it's the new, it's the new star now. Everyone's talking about it. And look, and it has great strengths, but where we see typically where we have deployed those kind of technologies is actually in combination with a set of rules. So you take a margin call and you push it through an NLP engine, and it gives you a confidence score of 7.8. Well, what's your view? Are you going to take that and think, I'll run with it? Or actually, are you then going to do some further analysis that says, well, let me just match this with my book of record. Let me actually potentially put an automated call out to a counterparty to say, this is what I believe this is. Can you tell me, can you confirm? So it's actually just part of an automation journey. And that's where we believe actually embedding the latest technologies with mainstream automation technologies, but that combination and applying them to specific cases. And I think it's interesting when both Peter and Philip have talked about the application of NLP to emails. It's been for a specific use because you have to get trained data, you have to understand what that process is and the exception handling around that process when something goes wrong. So, but the deployment of technologies to those processes actually can give you a very powerful outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think the important message there is with any kind of unstructured or dark data is to apply some context to it. We may not be making it structured in the classical sense, but we're applying context so we can derive meaning from it. And just to change track slightly, there was another question that came in about when investing in intelligent automation, upgrading legacy versus building a new project from scratch. And what is our experience on the best long-term decision? I won't throw that out to the panel right now, but I do just want to touch on that a little bit, because I think, in my opinion, the experience we've had with our clients is that the biggest step you can take to address that issue is to make the most informed decision you can. And making the most informed decision requires you to be data-driven where you can. And a lot of the RPA type initiatives and other automation initiatives that we've dealt with historically sort of lacked that detailed data to back up why are we automating that process and what is the real benefit of doing it. And one of the things we've seen come up in recent times, and is gaining traction is process mining. And there's tools out there like Celonis that really get under the hood of what actually are the process steps, how long do they take, how many times do you branch off the main branch and go down all these sub branches, your edge cases, etc. And where really are the bottlenecks? Is it the 5% of edge cases, or is it the main tranche of 70% of the volume? And it really allows you to make quantitative analytical decisions about which processes to automate. What would your benefit be if you did automate them? Where would your saves be? So that's an aspect that I think is really worth considering, alongside the other challenges around, are you just masking technical debt, etc. So I just wanted to touch on that, and Andrew and Phil, are you guys doing anything with process mining tools like Celonis? Andrew, do you guys integrate with Celonis? Is that often a part of a piece of work that a client has done before it arrives at your door?
Sometimes it does, in terms of understanding. It's one of the challenges that we have when we're talking to a client, which is, we have a view of what the problem to solve for is, because we see it elsewhere, but it manifests itself in different ways with different clients. So in some instances they have used a process mining tool to map what they're doing end to end. So we'll integrate with the tool, or we'll work in conjunction with consultants, because a lot of it is a consultancy offer wrapped around the tool. So we'll pick up and then we'll work in conjunction with those going forward.
Yeah, and I think we've not used them extensively. We use them more in our IT area than in the business side. I think just like for RPA, for robotization, if you automate poor processes, or if you analyze poor processes, you don't get an optimal outcome. So I think what I would say is we found that integration of the human touch or knowledge of the complex ecosystem in which we work is really critical in seeking to drive process improvement. And then you overlay on that the knowledge of the technology that's available to provide automation and efficiency. And I think that collecting the right data to address both of those things in a process mining method is challenging. We've been using something called value stream mapping, which is part qualitative and part quantitative, and it models changes to processes and their impacts and produces expected outcomes on cost, speed, number of FTEs, client experience, that kind of thing. But it kind of presupposes that you've already got the right process flow in place. It doesn't help you redesign the process flow. And I think that's the key piece, is you do need a certain level of knowledge and experience of this business to understand the ecosystem, and then develop your process around that, and then you can overlay the tools on top.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Just interested in time, I want to move on to challenges and lessons learned. Pete, we talked a little bit about the challenges with RPA in the past, and you used your cat analogy to kind of talk about how RPA is somewhat masking the underlying problem. The underlying problem is still there, it just has felt tip pen on it. Do you think there are similar challenges for intelligent automation? Are we setting ourselves up for some kind of additional burden or complexity in the future? What do we need to look out for with intelligent automation?
I suppose in short, no, not necessarily, right? So the as mentioned earlier, the RPA tended to create technical debt, actually largely because change on the underlying systems was so hard. There's nothing per se wrong with automating a process. The challenge is just a technical one, right? So the technologies around intelligent automation are real. They can be very powerful. They tend to advance in giant leaps and bounds. As a linguist by training originally, it's hard to keep up with some of the developments around natural language. I know we've talked about that quite a lot today. And fundamentally, the real challenges, as we were just saying, really are about data, not about technology. And actually, to some extent, always have been. The actual technology around artificial intelligence generally has actually been around for a surprisingly long time. It's the underlying data that always trips it up. And actually, as Jibs, as in Capco, we do a lot of work at our clients around data lineage and data quality, which is very explicitly driven by the need to prepare for a wave of much more prevalent and intelligent automation to come. You know, and the implementation challenges are really all around that.
Okay, thanks, Peter. And Phil, are there any challenges you think you'd like to add to that Peter hasn't mentioned? And also, since we have Andrew on the line, you know, in your experience working with tech vendors, if you had to give vendors like Accepta 3 tips to make it easier to work with you, what would they be?
I'm sure Andrew's going to tell me that he already considers all 3 of these every time he meets with them.
I'm going to write these down, Phil, don't worry.
Yeah, the first one is address the question of integration. So the product can be fantastic, but it has to integrate, and it has to be economically sensible for us to integrate it into our current processes. The second is I would encourage firms like Andrew's to help to drive standardization, not just to deal with it, but to instead of aping the standards that exist, to be a force for good in resolving them. And the third is to think about the end-to-end process, not just a bit of the chain that you're in. And that will make the solution more relevant. I think that often solutions are wonderful standalone, but when you put them in the end-to-end chain, they don't work because they don't integrate. And it's back to the integration question again. So that would be my 3 asks. And now he's going to tell me that he does that 100% of the time.
And Andrew, it'd only be fair to flip the question. If you had to give 3 tips to Phil for working with solutions like Accepta, what would they be?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably take a more, and look, and this is the context of me coming, you know, long history of delivering software and services to organizations. But I think having very clear success criteria, i.e. what good looks like for all parties, and all parties within my client. And I've got live examples where I've got different groups within a client that have different views of what good looks like. So actually, you know, clear success criteria and actually showing progress to those. And I've been involved in some very big transformation programs that kind of show something at the end, you know, and actually drip feeding success through the course of an engagement is a good thing, because it helps win hearts and minds, and also helps actually review and make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So I think that's one thing. I always say this: every single initiative I've been involved in that hasn't gone well has had a lack of strong leadership. Particularly on my client side. One of my most successful projects was where the exec sponsor didn't allow the requirements to go off course, didn't allow the continual introduction of changes as the initiative went through. So really kept it on course. So strong leadership. And I'd say the other one is a single team, and we work really, really hard. And the fact that Accepta is configurable by our clients, and we often work with them, actually a single team approach is where we're all in it together. And I've got one particular example now where, and inevitably, you know, the project has hit a couple of bumps, and it's not Accepta's problem, it's not the client's problem, it's our problem, and we work together to make sure it moves. And anyone that thinks you're going to work together over a program of work and something's not going to go wrong is incredibly naive. So that single shared vision and a single team approach, and everyone's in it together, fostering that culture is really, really important.
Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Andrew. And just for the last few minutes, I want to change track again. Phil, if we're moving to an increasingly automated post-trade environment, does location strategy become somewhat redundant in the future? Do we end up with a 24/7 operational environment where it doesn't really matter which time zone you're in because we have bots doing a lot, if not all, of the manual work? Like, what's your view on where we're heading in terms of location strategy?
I think it gives us more flexibility. But then as an industry, we already operate with a pretty globally dispersed operation. And one of the things that we've learned actually through COVID is that internet connectivity has become much more crucial in work from home. And I think that's going to become an important factor when we look at our future location strategy planning. But a lot of the nearshoring, offshoring has been done. And location strategies are really now driven not by whether automation is available, but they're driven by things like regulation, time zone, language, although tech might change that if we can start using tech to deal with language issues, client proximity, that kind of thing. I think for firms that have high manual, low value roles in offshore locations, I imagine that intelligent automation would rather reduce the use of those locations where those roles are prevalent rather than increase them. But for high value roles, I don't see it having a significant impact. I think that the high value roles are located where they are for very good reason.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And speaking of location, someone has asked a question, and we made it 59 minutes through a webinar without mentioning the C word. But does intelligent automation increase or decrease operational risk in a remote working environment? Phil, in fact, any of the panelists, do you want to very quickly provide your opinion on that?
I think it reduces it. I think, provided you've got the right governance around the automation, one of the issues with work from home, as I just said, was as we saw at the start of the pandemic, you had organizations that couldn't activate their work from home because of things like poor internet connectivity, or people didn't have the kit. If those functions were performed by machines that were centrally located or cloud-based, you wouldn't have had those risks. So I actually think it gives the opportunity to reduce operational risk.
I think I agree with Phil, although I think there's also, we've got clients, and I think you mentioned this earlier on, Phil, who are saying, well, look, actually, there's some working practices which are, we self-authorize for clients. So we've got to print all of these forms and just self-authorize and sign them. But actually, everyone's working at home. So actually, it's given us a headache in terms of that working at home. And if you can change some of those aspects of the process and introduce automation at the same time, I think it really can drive efficiency, and therefore that location is not a hindrance in any way.
Peter, anything to add?
Not really. I mean, I think Phil and Andrew covered that very well. As I can't add anything to that. Okay.
Cool. Thank you for that. We are actually just right on the half-hour mark, so I think we're going to have to wrap up there. There's a lot more I'd like to discuss, but unfortunately out of time. But thank you very much to our panelists and to all the participants who attended and listened, and apologies to those whose questions we couldn't get around to. But this has been a great discussion, certainly an area that I'm sure there will be a lot more discussion and implementation work around at all the organizations within the post-trade space. For those that are interested, there will be more webinars in this capital markets series, the next one in early December on automation in financial markets infrastructure. So do look out on our website, capco.com, our LinkedIn and Twitter feeds for additional webinars coming up. And thank you again, everyone, for joining, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.